Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-minute Histories videos. And today we're going to talk about the building behind me, the Independent Order of Odd Fellows Hall. But before we do that, I want to say thank you to everybody who shared memories of buying ice from the American Ice Company in our video earlier this week. A lot of you bought ice for theaters, for birthday parties, even for April Fool's Day pranks. Who knew what a devilish lot you were? One woman shared that as a child growing up in Cumberland in Western Maryland, her grandfather on paydays would be flocked by kids as he walked down the street at the end of his shift because he was carrying a block of ice, and they knew that meant homemade snowballs that afternoon. Also wanted to share really quickly a story by a gentleman named Skip who shared a memory. He spent his summers at a summer camp in the Poconos where his mother worked as a camp nurse. He wandered about and was conscripted into a little bit of labor, including hauling 600-pound blocks of ice each week on the back of a flatbed truck to the camp kitchen. Here's what he writes. He says, us kids, my younger brother and me, and the camp's owner's daughter and son were instructed to sit atop the ice to keep the canvas from flying off while underway. On a hot summer's day, I'll never forget how first delighted I was to be sitting on ice, and then how uncomfortably freezing my butt got the longer I maintained my station aboard the canvas-covered ice on the moving flatbed truck. So what a great memory. Thank you so much, Skip. All right, back to this building. It was built in 1891 by the Odd Fellows, and it's neat in a lot of ways, including that the Odd Fellows started here in Baltimore in 1819. Or maybe, let's take a look. In 1817, a gentleman named Thomas Wildey emigrated from England. He was an orphan in England, in London, and lived with an uncle, apprenticed as a carriage spring maker, and joined the Odd Fellows in London when he turned 21. The Odd Fellows started in London in 1730, basically out of the English guild system, where the trades like butchers and carpenters would band together in a fraternity to promote their trade. The name Odd Fellows, its origins are somewhat murky. One theory is that there were a bunch of folks who did odd jobs that didn't fit neatly into the guild system, so they banded together and formed their own fraternity, the Odd Fellows. Another theory is that the Odd Fellows promoted social interaction and mutual help, even reaching across the strictly hierarchical social lines in England of the day, and that was considered quite odd. But whether they chose the name for themselves or other people chose it for them, they embraced it, and are still going strong today. So back to Thomas Wildey. He moves to Baltimore in 1817 and is pretty much lonely, and that's for two reasons. One is, this is just after the War of 1812, and we in Baltimore are not so keen to make friends with the British, who had just tried to reinvade America. Number two is we had a yellow fever epidemic going on, and there weren't so many folks hanging out at the taverns and the bars. So Wildey, in 1819, decides to correct that by forming his own chapter of the Odd Fellows here in America. On March 27th, 1819, he puts an ad in the Baltimore American that says basically, hey, if you're interested in joining forming a chapter of the Odd Fellows, join me at 7 o'clock at the Seven Stars Tavern. And lo and behold, 4 folks answer that call. John Welch, who happens to be an Odd Fellow from London himself, John Dunham, John Cheatham, and Richard Rushworth. We don't know so much about them, but the important point is that there were 4 of them. So 4 of them plus Wildey made 5, and that was a quorum, enough under the Odd Fellows rules of order to form their own lodge. And they did that in April of 1819, the Washington Lodge number 1, and it was recognized by the mothership across the pond. The wrinkle is that about 10 years before in New York, some folks self-formed their own Odd Fellows Lodge, the Shakespeare Lodge. I think it was 6 boat builders, a comedian, and a singer did that. Their first recruit was the innkeeper, the tavern keeper where they met. But communication was not so good back then, and there was really no reason for the boat builders to ring up the carriage spring maker in Baltimore and talk about Odd Fellows. So neither group knew what the other was doing. And in fact, our claim to fame as the beginning of the Odd Fellows in America is because our chapter was the first to be recognized. So they're going strong. By 1825, there are chapters in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Baltimore, and we form the Grand Lodge of the United States, and that's also recognized by the mothership in London. Eventually, we break away, and that's where we get the independent part of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. So our lodges here in America are separate from the ones back in England. Along the way, the Odd Fellows do some pretty interesting things. In 1851, they create a chapter for women called the Rebeccas. They were the first national fraternity to incorporate women. And in 1865, just after the Civil War ended, they sort of enacted their belief in reaching across social and political boundaries by having a public parade where members, Odd Fellows who fought for the Confederacy and Odd Fellows who fought for the Union, marched side by side. That gained national attention from here in Baltimore. They were a little late to the equity, recognizing equity, though. It wasn't until 1971 that they admitted African Americans, and it wasn't until 2001 that they admitted women as equals into the Odd Fellows lodges. But in 1891, back to the building, 1891, this building was built in the grand Romanesque style, but it's actually rather plain for that style, and that was on purpose. The builders wanted to honor Wildey, who they described as plain as a pipe stem, but with a heart as large and sympathetic as the principles of the order. So that's what this building is meant to do. Wildey, by the way, if you want to pay homage to him, he's got a 52-foot statue on Broadway right at Fayette Street. You'll be excused if you drive up and miss it. It's hidden by some trees, but there it is. So this building gets built. In World War II, it's used as an USO ballroom for tens of thousands of service members every month. But by 1975, this building that had been the headquarters for the Baltimore Lodge, as well as 20 chapters, was down to just 2 chapters. And it eventually basically became vacant, and many people feared it would be demolished. But luckily for us, in 1976, so a year later, a company called the Azola Company, which is still going strong, rehabbing buildings today, bought the building and lovingly restored it, turned it into an office. Today, it's turned into apartments, and you can see people coming and going, the apartment dwellers. But if you're walking down here and you want to get to know its origins, all you have to do is look at the cornerstone here on Cathedral Street, and you will see the letters IOOF, Independent Order of Odd Fellows. And with that, I'll say thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.